Good evening, and thank you very much for joining us for this very special online screening of The Lobster, which I hope you just enjoyed as much as I did. It's a marvellous film. I've seen it 3 times now, actually. My name is Guy Lodge, and we are thrilled to be joined tonight by the woman responsible for creating the film's very unique world that you just saw, the production designer Jacqueline Abrahams. We've been taking your questions via Twitter, so please, if you have any pressing issues or questions you want to know, do keep them coming in. But Jacqueline, I want to start by asking you a basic thing. How does one start, how do you get into production design? I mean, we hear so much about people wanting to become filmmakers, and there's much less focus on, how you end up in those kind of contributing artistic roles.
How I got in is really different because I'm I'm quite old. Yeah. So I went to art school and basically I sort of studied fine art as much as you can or could in the 80s. And I left and did lots of different things. I had no idea what I wanted to do. And I ended up being a scenic painter and then sort of getting involved as a scenic painter and working with a number of designers who then sort of said, hey, you might like it more in the department rather than painting. And there was one particular designer who was brilliant, and I assisted her, and she was right. I thought the conceptual side, the kind of creating the world and thinking about what that world might be, was really stimulating and really great. So it took a while to get into it. It took quite a long time to get into it. I was quite old compared to lots of people now, and I took my time and drifted a bit, and that's nice. I really like that. And so finally ended up kind of in the sort of construction of the design rather than the painting or the making. Yeah. So
it seems quite an obvious question, but how would you define what a production designer actually does? Because I think some people sort of think of it very much as set designing, but there's a lot more to it than that, particularly now that filmmaking has kind of gone in so many technical sort of directions and possibilities.
It's probably very much to do with the piece, isn't it? Don't you think? It's like some work, like in a way like The Lobster, some stuff has got, Yorgos is very strongly knows what he wants. So you're supporting that and you're trying to pull that off. And sometimes you get involved in a very highly conceptual piece where you literally have to wonder about what is the currency, how are people, what's the technology, how are people breathing the air, So I think the projects are really different, and I think you have to approach them in very different ways. Yeah. But essentially you're creating a world that surely allows people to believe that whoever is the actor doing whatever they're doing is really doing it, just for that moment. Yeah. And I think that's hard because if you've got a lot of actors that are in many different films and you're seeing their faces a lot, you have to somehow support the story enough for us to go, right, okay.
And rather than place them in a new world entirely.
Yeah. It's a bit of a con trick, I think, as well. I think you're playing with people's emotional memory with things that never really existed, but you're presenting them in a way that makes them feel like they experienced them.
So when a script like The Lobster, comes in, which is, I think, needless to say, an entirely unique piece of work, and when you kind of do that first cold read, I mean, how do you then take that page and start thinking of a kind of visual design for it?
I mean, the first thing you do is go, this is amazing. Like kind of reading a script like that is like, immediately you're really excited. Yeah. Because it's so unusual and so brilliant and so funny and ironic and so many things that in a way, the weird thing you do, and this is something I'm always really aware of, is you then sit on your own in a room and find references that somehow speak to the themes of the piece or a tone of it that you've picked up on, which is a bit like your sensibility, but yet you haven't discussed that with the director. So essentially you come to a meeting having not talked to the director about anything, which is kind of weird, isn't it, when you think it's very collaborative and they have a very strong vision about what they want to do. But I guess that's quite an interesting thing for a director to see how you responded and what you feel and what's come up. So then, sometimes it's quite hard because sometimes maybe the piece is very, I don't know, it's almost like documentary. And you go, okay, so this needs to feel real. And sometimes it's so fantastic that you think of so many things and get really excited and almost have to stop yourself. You know, the pile of references you show are so enormous, it's almost like overwhelming. But that sort of somehow expresses your excitement and your response to the piece.
We've actually had a question from one of the audience, which is, I mean, what do you then use to show, you know, Yorgos, in this case, what your vision is for that film? Do you have mood boards, or is it more abstract than that? Or?
I mean, I think I've got to say, I personally, when I think about my experience on The Lobster, you're not really showing Yorgos what your vision is. You're more going your response to his script. And I think it's more a response that shows him that somehow you understand it, or that maybe you share a sensibility, or you have picked up on things that he's found funny or horrific, or, you know. Whereas I think some pieces, I don't know, I think when you have a meeting with a director, you obviously know the work they've done, and I think his work is extremely original, so therefore you're more excited by what his thoughts are, rather than go, well, this is what I think it is, you know. I mean, yeah, of course you pull things together, and I think for me the humour and irony was so strong in the script that often those were images that I had to show him, but very few of the images that I showed him we used in the film. I mean, maybe a name badge, you know, but you know, it was more, I think, more showing him that you understood and shared a sensibility, possibly. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I think what's so striking about your work in the film is that, I mean, the premise is so, you know, openly absurd and so ludicrous, and it could have gone in a under a sort of different director or different design in a very fantastical direction. And yet you've kept it very grounded, and the design is very stark, and that, you know, marvelous hotel, which we've all seen and been to, sort of, you know, resort hotels like that, but it's very stripped down and kind of believable. Was that a sort of pointed contrast to the sort of fantasy of the script?
I mean, I think that's absolutely the director's decision. I mean, that absolutely comes from Yorgos. You know, he's got a really strong aesthetic and a really strong idea of what he wants, you know, from his films he's done before. And I think that, I mean, without speaking about that specific film, but, you know, isn't it more interesting if absurd things happen in ordinary circumstances? In a way, they're more striking, aren't they? You know, some films, the fantasy or the madness of it, they set it in a slightly different tone, and that's great too. You know, Pan's Labyrinth is amazing because it's so bizarre, but in a way, the bizarreness comes from it being quite brutally real in parts. So I don't know, I think that the tone and the juxtapositions are really important. And in terms of the hotel, I remember us once having a discussion about it because it was filled with quite a lot of different art and different stuff, and I felt that it was really important to somehow make everything neutral so that you didn't pick up on anything. Because with a script like this, with the performances like they are, you'd kind of start imbuing things with meaning, which would not be helpful. So in a way, the design needs to be very, very gentle and very subtle in a way, so that you just sit back and relax and
listen and absorb and
it's almost like you clock it and then you don't notice it anymore, and I think that's good. I think that's good with lots of design actually, but you know.
How long does it take to prep a film of this scale? I mean, Lobster obviously being, what was the budget on this one, for example?
I'm not sure what the total budget was, but our art department budget was pretty small. It was sort of, I think it was around 38,000 euros, which is not very much.
Not a lot, no.
But, and I think we had something like 6 weeks prep. But, you know, half of the film is in a forest, so, you know, you kind of, you know, you're able to, you know, there's not much you do in a forest, you know, in terms of the design of it. So, you know, it's mainly about working out, animals and various vehicle adaptations and, you know, the guns and the darts and the, you know, props and bags and stuff like that. And, you know, what the bedspreads are going to be, what the, you know, literally wandering around the hotel going, well, that chair's great, those bits are good, we can use that. But it was also a live hotel at the time, so there was only so much you could use, you know, without it being, you know, at one point you're kind of pulling a chair out of someone's room while they've gone out to have breakfast and swapping it with something else, you know, because you need that chair for that scene. So it was.
How closely then do you work with, say, a location scout or whatever to find, you know, just the right patch of forest or just the right kind of bleak seaside hotel?
Yeah, I mean, the seaside hotel they'd already found, I think there were 3 that had been auditioned, and I think I think this was the favourite one of Yorgos's, definitely. But I think there were two others. But this had a definite quality. There was something about it, you know. And I think we made decisions without seeing all of them. You know, I think there's one in Scotland, and I can't remember. There were quite a few. And in terms of the woods, I think we auditioned them. We literally walked around the woods. You know, Thimios, the director of photography, Thimios, the writer, Yorgos. You know, we all, Owen, the location manager, and we literally went, that's an interesting spot. And then called them various things and made a map of them. It was really funny.
It would be very easy to lose that spot again.
Yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we put stakes in. It was a bit eccentric, you know. There was a map and there was one called something like, I don't know, Thinking Branch, or so, you know, because someone had sat on the branch and literally gone like this. So that's Thinking Branch area, you know. And then of course the schedule comes in and the actors come in and trying to scramble down slopes in the dark, and then you go, well, that was a great area, but actually this area is going to work for lots more. So
you say, for example, that one of the hotels you considered was in Scotland, but I believe this was all filmed in County Kerry, right, in Ireland. I mean, how was that completely a free choice, or were there sort of funding issues sort of pushing you to one country or the other?
I'm pretty sure there were funding issues. That the producers would know more about that, but obviously Ireland offers an amazing sort of incentive to film there, and an extraordinary area, which is incredibly beautiful and, you know, amazing people.
But you wouldn't necessarily know it's Ireland. I think what's so great about the film is it sort of seems familiar, and yet it could be absolutely sort of anywhere. Well, we say that being from the UK, but I've spoken to a lot of sort of American viewers who are like, where was that shot? Where is it set?
It almost could be Croatia or something, you know, it could be anywhere sort of, I agree. I think that's interesting too, isn't it?
And how far do you sort of think then of what, you know, the outside world is beyond what we see on screen, or in the kind of allegorical story like this? Do you just sort of focus on the sort of micro-universe you've created?
Well, I think the choices of where then you shoot in Dublin, which is supposed to be the notional town, and how you shoot in certain, you know, apartments, you know, that was auditioned really carefully in terms of what's the tone of it. And that's always really difficult when you're talking about a notional future. So, you know, is it going to be, I don't know, I mean, Ireland has got so many interesting developments and a lot of ghost ones which were built and then obviously didn't get carried on. And I think Dublin, I mean, we looked around lots of areas in Dublin, you know, and recce'd lots of different things and thought of lots of different places. And then I can't remember how we ended up finding this, you know, this enormous, shopping centre. I mean, I used to go and buy stuff from there and thought, it's so amazing. It's just somehow speaks volumes of a culture, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And, you know, I was saying earlier, you know, it's so bonkers to think of, I don't know, Colin Farrell and Mr. Price. It's like the juxtaposition of that is mad, absolutely mad. And in a way, that is part of the visual jarring. You're kind of going, wait a minute.
That sort of, the sort of familiar and unfamiliar right up against each other. Do you have a favourite kind of part of the film or favourite element that you worked on particularly?
I can't think. I mean, I haven't thought about that. I can't think of it. I think when I look at the film, it's such a whole, and it's really weird because I think with The Lobster, it's really specific, and I think that's absolutely down to, you know, Yorgos and Thimios. That when I look at it, I just think of it as just a total thing. Whereas often you can look at films and go, oh yes, that was that chair, that was that, you know. I mean, yes, of course, I look at it, and a lot of things have memories that were really funny and stories attached to them, which are just personal, you know, how Jackie O'Shea welded those things on the van, and, you know, like, you know, extraordinary people that were very incredibly helpful. But in terms of parts, I think I still so enjoy the story and so enjoy the script. You know, so I don't tend to go, oh yes, that was that.
As you say, it's such a sort of complete universe. That
I really feel
sort of creation of it is kind of your whole job, is your favourite part in a way, isn't it?
Yeah, and also I think it's because it has such a strong identity, and I think it was so set, you know, it was so considered and so carefully and beautifully crafted. You're sort of just part of it. You're trying to make it happen for those people rather than come in and go, well, what I think is, this is what it's about. And it's like, that's not relevant on a piece like this.
How closely do you then work with the costume designer in kind of building this world? Because it seems your work and theirs is so kind of a piece in terms of palette and texture. And do you sort of jointly agree on things beforehand, or?
I think I think a good relationship with lots of time, And,
Yeah.
you know, it's brilliant when you can actually sit down and go, well, I'm thinking these colours. And so someone knows. Sometimes, you know, on other films, sometimes you can literally not know where you're filming till a week before. And so you're making choices really close to filming. And then the poor costume designer has to literally go, what's the colour? You know, they kind of call you and go, what the hell is the colour for the room, you know? But I think on this, again, Yorgos has a hand very much on things, and he's really aware of what's going with what, and so you show a palette of what you're going to do, and then obviously you share that with everybody so they know the rough palette of the thing. So I think in terms of that, I think he orchestrates that very much like theatre. It feels more like a theatre production where people are collaborating in that way, you know.
Yeah. You've had quite a sort of diverse filmography so far. I mean, you've worked on some quite traditional period pieces to, you know, something more avant-garde like this, everything in between. How do you choose your projects? Is it purely the script and what, you know, what kind of speaks to you, or a particular environment you want to create?
I've got to say, like with the horror film, I did a horror film, and I've got to say I just was so excited because I've always wanted to do horror. I love the idea of creating environments and atmospheres. And I thought, God, that'd be so fantastic to do. So for me, that was very much about the genre. The director I'd worked with before and really liked, so that was great. And in terms of things like the Enfield Haunting, again, it was almost like, God, this is so exciting to do something which is really strongly based on documentary footage, but yet you can take away from that and sort of almost present back to people as though it was true. Yeah. And I mean, that isn't their house. That's nothing to do with where they lived, but there's something about it that speaks to the kind of piece. So, and then sometimes you just go, that director, I love their work. You know, I work with Ritesh Batra, who's, you know, his film's beautiful. The Lunchbox is great. So that was a total joy to, you know, so I think it's a mixture.
But of the kind of, the script, the people, the genre.
I think it always, I think the director's vision is so important. I mean, that's so important, isn't it? You know, it's a bit like, you get your inspiration, you get your direction from someone. It's brilliant to have someone with a plan.
It feels like every year when kind of award season rolls around and, you know, production design awards are given out at the Oscars and whatever else, it's always the kind of big lavish fantasies and kind of period pieces that, you know, are kind of recognised and rewarded. And contemporary production design in particular gets very little attention. Do you think do you find one more challenging than the other? Is contemporary design as challenging as kind of period or fantasy?
Sure, this probably sounds really terrible, but I think that people have more to say. When you have contemporary stuff, more people have their opinions. Whereas when it's period, they kind of get a bit freaked out because it's a bit like, well, it's historical. Yeah. I don't really know what was true. And so, you know, you can sort of go, well, this is how it would have been. And
so
you know, I mean, that sounds a dreadful thing to say, but I think also, contemporary is really hard, actually, to tone well. And I think that sometimes period stuff feels like it has a real prescription of what's okay and what isn't okay.
Well, you have all your history books and your design. You can kind of slavishly, you know, depending on, you know, if it's a historical biopic or whatever, you can, you know, look up the exact kind of locations that you want and replicate them.
Yeah.
But
which is why something like Dogville is so brilliant.
Yeah.
Because you're going to go, oh, thank God, you know, thank God we don't have this kind of like prescription or, you know, like La Reine Margot, Patrice Chéreau's film, it's quite old. I mean, I thought it was amazing because it had such a different feel to it. It wasn't like what you expect and what you're familiar with. So
it's
I think
kind
that's
of
great.
Period, but still utterly its own world, you know, which I think Sofia Coppola's Marie Antoinette, well, even though it was filmed in Versailles, has completely its own aesthetic, and it doesn't feel like a sort of a slavish recreation.
Yeah.
You know?
And I think that's really exciting because I think to have that space to do that is great. I think maybe it would be fun to do that a bit more, you know, not to be so worried about it being sort of somehow aligned to the National Trust and be a little bit more, I don't know, just more experimental maybe.
We've just had someone ask us how much of the production design process is you on your own and how much of it is in collaboration with others. How much of it is just you sort of sitting there with a sketch pad and then sort of, you know, conferences?
Yeah, I've got to say that is not really how I work at all. Yeah. You know, I'd love to say yes, you know.
It's quite a romantic
It is really romantic, and also I just feel like, I don't know, I think curation is how I would definitely word it. I think I was saying this earlier to someone that, you know, I think you curate. I mean, I don't believe I have an original voice at all, but what I do believe is I have an original way of curating different things, and that I think we all have. I think that's interesting. You know, we've got like so many images on the internet. You know, that is bonkers. I mean, when you start researching for a film and you literally, you know, you put in something and up comes, you know, 20,000 images of, and it's literally, well, okay, so you're choosing that one, and then you're putting it with that one, and then you're putting it with that one. And I feel like that is a form of collaboration to start with. They're not my images, I haven't taken them, they're not anything to do with me, but I'm somehow creating a sensibility out of them, and I think that's how you work with a team as well. You know, you have all sorts of people in your team, and they bring all their experiences, and and their, you know, their family histories, their family holidays, what they think a sofa is. You know, I mean, it's really subtle stuff, isn't it? You know, and I think that enriches it enriches the pot, doesn't it? Yeah. If I just sat there and went, nope, that's how it is, it's not going to be so
not really
interesting.
Going to turn out as well, is it? Are there any production designers, kind of past or present, whose work you kind of consistently look up to or are inspired by?
I think there's a designer called Simon Elliott. I've always loved his work. It's really beautiful. He did Brick Lane, and I think his touch is really lovely. I think there's a lot of really good designers, I've got to say. I mean, I'm not one to kind of have a sort of catalogue of people, but I know, you know, I love the Coen brothers' work, and whoever designs their stuff is absolutely is beautiful, absolutely incredible. I mean, my sensibility is now definitely more in European films. So if I think of Beyond the Hills and, I don't know, Miss Violence, you know, films like that. I mean, it's incredible and beautifully produced in every way. And again, has a very strong sense of authorship where someone has gone, this is the world of the film. And it's from the costumes to the acting to the this, to the bird that's stuffed on the ledge, to this, the curtains, you know. And that's really exciting. And
yet again, I mean, those were good examples of films which people might watch and not immediately think of the production design in it, because it's so kind of seamless and so utterly believable that they kind of just assume the actors have walked onto set and it was just there. Yeah. Which in a way is, if people aren't thinking about the production design, that's in a way your job very well done. That's got to be a good thing, definitely. But you know, it's funny because I think we should be mindful of all these things. We should be observant in a way that's, you know, maybe not as common. You know, we look at things like Star Wars and go, wow, look at that. You know, and big films that are very, but the subtler kind of poetic ones, we kind of like, you know, we don't necessarily notice it as much. And it's funny, isn't it? Like you say, it's almost like the more you see it, yes, it's brilliant and it can be beautifully crafted, but I don't know, I quite like it when it's sort of more subtle. Yeah. You know. We've had someone ask us, what are your top tips for aspiring production designers? Gosh, top tips. Deal out your wisdom. Deal out wisdom. Well, I don't know, but I know what I feel like, I don't know. I'm sort of old, so I feel like I'm from a different era. I mean, I feel like, I think it's important not to rush. I think it's important to take your time. You know, there's so much stuff to watch and look at, and you know, watching films obviously is incredibly informative as long as you choose a good, you know, catalogue of films. You could probably, you know, give people a really good list of films. But I think, you know, going to art exhibitions, seeking out interesting stuff. Don't just, you know, what frustrates me is that, you know, your research time for projects can be really short. And you literally go on the internet because that's where everyone goes now. Yeah. You know, I've got bookshelves full of art books and photography, and I literally, unless I'm given enough time, I kind of go, oh, it's that book, and I quickly have a look in, and then I Google the photographer because it's quicker than scanning the image. But you must know those photographers. You must inform yourself so you know that Saul Leiter did beautiful stuff, and if you want street photography, you look at those people. And because if you just rely on Pinterest and, you know, we're all going to start designing the same stuff. You're using the same influences. Yeah. So I think being curious and making sure you're rigorous is really important. You know, myself included, it's really easy to kind of go, oh, well, I mean, but, you know, and to keep finding out about stuff, like, you know, like if I think of where we're heading in our future, I feel like I need to start looking at games. I need to start looking at all the different games there are now, because that is informing lots of stuff. And if VR becomes the thing it's supposed to become, I need to know what that world looks like. I need to know what the technology is going to be.
because then I'll be able to be informed in the design. I can't just go, oh, well, I don't like it, and I'll look at it when I'm interested. It's like, you know.
Well, that kind of leads into my next question, because the actual physical nuts and bolts of filmmaking are changing so much faster than we can keep up with it. And you have, I don't know, say a film like Avatar, which has, astonishing production design where almost none of it is actually built. It's all in a computer. Have you had much kind of experience working with the digital side of things?
I've had a little bit on the Woman in Black, the second. There was a sort of, we created a whole world of destroyed London at Greenwich, and then of course the CG people added on a whole load of stuff, and it's quite interesting to me, that world, because I feel I'm a little critical about it, actually. I mean, that may be to do with the fact that I just find the look of a lot of these games a bit incredible, a bit sort of, you feel like you're immediately in kind of a sort of sophisticated Michael Bentine's potty time. Yeah. There's like little plumes of smoke, and as soon as the plume of smoke, I get really irritated. I feel like everything needs to support the story. All of the stuff we do, whether it's the acting, the costume, it all needs to support that story. And if the CG gets a bit excited and becomes sort of like a game, or as sophisticated and beautifully produced, sometimes that can take away from the feeling. And in the Enfield Haunting, it was decided very strongly by the director and the producer, we're going to do everything in camera. So the only thing they did was paint out sticks, and so the whole thing had a really low-tech, really interesting effect. So when the cupboard moved, someone was in the cupboard moving it. And I think there's something so interesting about that.
It's very comforting to know that there are still people standing inside cupboards kind of bobbling along.
But also to the power of the piece, because it means it has something else, that isn't quite smooth enough. It has a character that's something weird.
Sort of tactile about it.
Yeah.
But it's then still must be an exciting field to be in, because you must be kind of learning on every single project some kind of new technique.
Amazing. I mean, and people have such skill. But I think it's always, and myself included, it's always really important not to get carried away by the thing and remember why you're doing it. And obviously that can be difficult. Because, it's exciting to create a world. It's amazing to focus and control the room or the palette or the colour. But if it becomes a control that's sort of almost your own little project, you've got to be really careful to remember why you're doing it.
Well, it's what we were saying earlier. I mean, if someone comes out of film and just the first thing they say is, God, the production design on that was amazing. I mean, it's great for you.
Yeah, but
it means something hasn't quite, integrated between story and design and direction. But I think that is us just about out of time. But thank you so much. This was so fascinating. And
thank you.
Can you just tell us what are you working on right at the moment?
I've actually finished a really lovely short film with a Russian director called Vika, and it's set in the Calais migrant camp. So we built a migrant camp in Iver.
Oh wow!
So that was we could have rented it out as a sort of photo opportunity for politicians. A safe Calais could have been quite good. We could have made a fortune.
I look forward to it. Well, thank you again so much for joining us, and thank the audience for their great questions. And Jacqueline Abrahams, everyone, thank you very much.